Cool.
So thank you all for coming. This is our presentation on pivoting in a project, strategies for adjusting to scope change.
I am Brian Manning. I'm the IT operations manager at Media Current. I've been with Media Current for about 4 years now and have worked in project management and IT through that process with many different clients and scopes of levels of different venues on that.
My name is Victoria Miranda. I am a project manager at Media Current. I have been in project management for 10 years, mostly tech, spent a little bit of time in nonprofit, and about 6 of those years are in Drupal specifically. So who are we? Media Current is a full-service digital agency that implements world-class open source software, development, strategy, and design to achieve defined goals for enterprise-level organizations seeking a better return on investment. So what does that mean? We're not there yet.
I pushed the wrong button, sorry.
We're not there yet, Brian. Calm down. So just a little bit of background. We were founded in 2007, again, specializing in Drupal. We're headquartered in Atlanta. We have a team of 75 plus full-time employees, 70 plus thousand hours in Drupal 8. We're a top 5 contributor in the world for Drupal.org. And our client include, again, large enterprise clients. So we're excited to be here and to share some of our experiences with you guys. Just as a disclaimer, before we get started, I have a cough. It might flare up.
She's not going to die.
I'm not contagious, but it might flare up, so bear with me. So what are some things that we're going to cover today? We're going to cover project kickoff, capturing your client's vision, communication, avoiding overcommitment, identifying your goals and creating a plan, delivering successfully, retrospectives, not postmortems, and then, of course, any questions that you have.
So this is a statistic that we pulled on here that 75% of businesses and IT executives anticipate that their software project will fail before it even begins. I kind of thought that this was a very interesting statistic, especially as project managers, about the mindset of our clients and stakeholders before we even start a project. This can range from either their lack of knowledge or from previous experiences that have caused them to have poor projects that have failed or not delivered, or they come out of it with a bad taste in their mouth. And so it really spoke to the different types of project management and the level of where things are. So helping our clients understand and go into it so that they don't feel like it's going to fail, that they're more excited about that, and really helping to shape the attitude of a project before it even begins. So as a project manager, strategist, developer, it's really important to identify your team as you begin so that you know exactly what is needed on that. A lot of times whenever you're starting that, the client doesn't really know what they're needing. They're coming to you as someone that's going to help them get from the start to the end. With these, a lot of times they are coming in with just an idea, or they see something, a need that is trying to be met. And so as we are, one of our roles as project managers is to help kind of build that project team and get that project started in there. And with that building the project team, you get different inputs and different levels of understanding from them so that we can actually work through and deliver what they need.
Where's the okay. All right. So let's talk about kicking off your project. Starting your project organized is key to successful delivery. The more organized you are at the start, the better prepared you are for the changes that are inevitably going to come. So let's talk about ways that, or what this means is, hold on, back up guys, sorry. This doesn't mean as a PM that you're doing all the legwork for getting your project off the ground, but it does set the precedent for moving the project forward. It empowers your team to be self-organized and then allows your team to become more passionate about what they're doing, not looking at things as just a task, and then taking ownership of the work. So let's talk about some things you can do to be prepared. Agendas from any type of on-site that you do, any call, even if it's 15 minutes, take the time to put an agenda together. Sprint planning, ticket outlines. This doesn't mean as the PM that you are grooming the entire ticket. Know your team's strengths, get the tickets together, and feel empowered to pass it off so that it can be groomed and everyone has insight into what's going on in the project. Building out a team forecast. If you're talking about a build, take it all the way out to delivery. Put your team on paper. Budget outlines. Budgeting outlines from creating budget outlines creates transparency from the beginning of the project, and it's also going to hold you accountable. And then client product reviews. This is creating checkpoints with the clients to make sure that the goals and the MVPs that you set early on are being accomplished, and then there's no surprises. So before you can capture your goals and your MVP, you have to start with capturing your client's vision. All clients are going to come into your project and they're going to have an idea of what they want to see. And there's a large chance that if you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, there's going to be some disagreement. As a project manager, it's your job to take all of those ideas, organize them, and create a plan of attack. So another thing that you might encounter is a client that has a pipe dream vision, meaning that their budget doesn't match what they want to see. So how do you set a realistic vision for what you can do within budget? And that's having a realistic conversation. Many times what's happening when you see that is that many clients want everything all at once. That can lead to overcommitment and failure within the sprint, which is a domino effect and ultimately is going to lead to failure in your project. As the delivery team, our job is to find that happy place where everybody feels good and can agree on what we're doing. One of the biggest things that I can empower you to do is don't be afraid to talk about failure. And that means flat out asking your clients in your kickoffs or in any meeting, what does failure look like to you? If you have no idea what your client considers failure, how can you bring them to a successful delivery? And also push hard to have your team involved early on in all the conversations. That means that everybody knows from the very beginning what the expectations are.
So one of the things that is important is asking the right questions early on. The more you know about a project, starting out, the more it's going to be able to really capture the scope and the vision of what they're trying to accomplish. Through that, a lot of times, like I was mentioning before, clients as they come in, they have an understanding of what they do. They're trying to meet a need. They have, someone's brought a project to them or said, hey, I'd like to upgrade our website, or I want to capture this, or, we need to move from D7 to D8 and we're going to use this, things like that. It can, be from Drupal to WordPress at different levels, but ultimately starting out, asking the right questions helps you as a project manager establish what is needed in that. One of the things that you accomplish by starting out with questions is it creates a level of transparency so that you don't have potential for surprises down the road. The more you know up front, the more you're able to ask that, the more that you have that communication. It creates a level of different variances for you, so you can also establish timelines. You can look for important dates of where they need to be along the project. Things like possible blockers. And one thing is Victoria's mentioned. Sometimes they come in with like a big grandiose type of idea that just won't meet their budget. But I like to encourage people to bring those ideas regardless, so that we can maybe possibly look at this into different phases that phased approach. We have those as nice to have in a project because, those are things that are so important to them. They like that, and we want to make sure that we're capturing those. So the other things that are really important are establishing what I like to call, your product owner. Sometimes as a project manager, we're wearing multiple hats, and we sometimes have to act as a product owner, but understanding with your client, with your stakeholders, who the kind of go-to people are so that they are the ones kind of taking more ownership of that project. They might need some hand-holding along the way, but being able to establish that type person and who's really in charge there. We've had many clients where they have different stakeholders, and if they're all kind of conflicting, then that creates chaos in the project right off. So having the real talks with them to establish who's in charge so that they can do that through the project is really important. And, as I say, who's the captain? Who's the one driving the ship here? We really want to do that so that as a project manager, you're working with them very closely. You're creating that transparency all the way from start to end, and they know where things are at. They don't come in and say, have questions and get surprises on there.
So far, we've stressed the importance of clear communication with your client, but what about communicating with your team as a whole? And what are the benefits of that? Again, it's important, even on the team side, to establish upfront who plays what role. And again, installing that self-organization and taking ownership in the work. So what are the benefits of that happening is that you, as a project manager, are going to have the ability to have more in-depth communication with your team. Your stand-ups are going to go quicker because everyone knows where they are in the process. And it also helps to set the tone that the whole team needs to be invested and passionate in the project. That is your number one job as the project manager. Our style is make it fun, make it family. And let's think back just a little bit to the statistic that Brian shared pretty early on. Your client is scared to death, and they are assuming that their project is going to fail. And if you can empower your team, keep them focused, and get them excited, that energy is going to bleed over into your client, and that is priceless. So, ask questions, and then ask more questions. Right off the bat, that is the number one thing that you can do. Just ask questions and don't be scared. Anything that you can think of, because the right ideas are in the middle, and it's going to take everyone involved to get there.
And with that too, just as add on to that, there's different levels of questions as well. There's internal questions. There's questions to your stakeholders. There's questions that you need to be asking yourself as you're going through this. How do we, establish a really successful project through that? And as you go through that, it's really helpful to just establish some things up front, but also throughout the whole process. You want to always be making sure that you are just keeping that openness and really challenging yourself, challenging your team, because sometimes as you get in a process, it kind of becomes easy, and so you kind of lose focus or kind of get in a laziness type thing, which can be dangerous as well, especially as changes come. If you do have to kind of pivot on a change there or something that gets added to that, it is really important just kind of continue to ask those to make sure you're going back to the original start of that, of what are we trying to establish with the project overall. So one thing too is, as you're going through these projects, overcommitment is something that I think all of us can really, do. Whether it's a project manager, if it's a developer or designer, strategist, really getting into an overcommitment type thing can be dangerous. So some steps to really kind of work past that is, really starting out, establishing your MVP, the most viable products there, the things that are the most important to deliver on what you're trying to establish. As you really kind of lay those out, then you can kind of start prioritizing to see what is going to be important to deliver throughout the project. Some things we go back and, like I was mentioning, it may be a second phase item that is not necessarily needed to launch the site. there might be things that they're nice to haves, but they're not really critical. So establishing those up front really creates an overall commitment and project line with that. That leads into really knowing your deliverables. Really as you see what you're going to do, you want to be able to set realistic deliverables throughout the project and in your timeline. Establishing a timeline as part of that really kind of sets up the overall pace of the project, whether or not it's going to be a quick turnaround or if it's going to be something that it's going to take a couple months. Knowing when those are going to be able to be delivered is really important. Communicating with your product owner, that is key. That going back to what I was saying of, establishing who's in charge. If you don't really have a product owner, sometimes it's helpful to act in that role a little bit. It's not always ideal, but you can work with someone to help them kind of be in that product owner role type of situation so that they know their product the best. They know what they were trying to do. So being able to really work with them and communicate so that any changes that are happening, they're working through that as they go. And don't be afraid to say no. A lot of times we get set up with situations where it's easy, you just want to kind of please someone. You want to really go into that. And as a project, sometimes you got to say no. You got to have, the hard, tough love situation to be able to keep the project on. And I think, I've been in situations many times where I've had to say no, and it's hard to do. It's kind of hard to push back, but the client really appreciates the honesty, and they appreciate that. I actually had one client that was really kind of truthful with me. They said, you're the nicest guy, but we really need you to say no to us and push back because we need you. That's your role. And it was really eye-opening to me because of of that. You want to be successful, you want to do that, but they also need the tough love at times too, and that really helps keep that project established and grounded in what is important. And keep your team grounded in delivery. Don't get caught up in too many meetings. Sometimes meetings can just be meetings, and you're meeting and you're not really being successful or really working through what is needed in there. So sometimes quick check-ins are good, but you don't want to get caught up in too many meetings. Managing your team morale and motivation. That's something, Victoria was saying, we want people to be passionate about what they're doing. We don't want it to just be a job. So as they go through, you want to kind of check in with them, see how the overall team morale is doing, making sure people are still excited about what they're doing, and actually being able to kind of push forward and just, that can be a quick check-in. Hey, how's it going? Hey, is things still working well? What can I do to help you? It may not mean that you're trying to do that, but just a quick check-in to see how they're doing really goes a long way and keeps people from feeling like they're just overburdened with things. And avoiding the burnout and frustration. Those are things where, you just kind of keep an eye. As a project manager, your job is to kind of keep a pulse of what's going on. And so, as you go through that, if you start to see that, then that's where you can check in more. You can see what maybe you can shift in the project to avoid those things. It's a real thing. Sometimes, with the burnout and frustration of the team members, it can derail things really easily. It can make things go off track really quick. So as a project manager, it's really important that you can kind of keep your finger on the pulse there and see what you can do to help keep that going. That graphic loads, but yeah, that's really key. It's hard for everyone to be able to say no, but it is important on there. One of the things of examples we did during a project, and I always love to do this, we had a project where it was really all hands on deck. It was constantly lots of hours, and it brought in a sense of camaraderie there, but it also had a lot of time where people were going through and just they were so committed and involved in it that they were on at all times of the day, on weekends. And so Kelly, who was the project manager here, she kind of put together this thing where if people were offline or supposed to be offline in our channels chat, you would tag them with their name differently to do that, but you'd still have people that were still going on there. Tobias in this situation was actually going on vacation, but he was checking in. So we had where the project manager Kelly here, she would actually kind of fuss at people and say, okay, get off, your room moderator, get out of the room, and it's good. But that kind of dedication there is they were excited about it. They wanted to be part of that project that was doing it. But as the project manager, it's important to actually protect that time and help encourage them to find that balance so that they don't get burned out. Because, sometimes they just get heads down, they want to do it, and it can, be dangerous too.
So you're coming through to the end of your discovery phase. You're feeling good about your communication with your client. You've set your team, and they're feeling really pumped and ready to go. So let's talk about what happens when you start identifying your goals and then putting a plan together to accomplishment, because ultimately that's our job as PM, right? We have to get it done. So the first thing you want to do is, or make sure that you're doing, is do not be afraid to revisit your MVP and readjust it as needed. That is going to be the difference between that fire when you have to communicate the pivot and the smooth pivot. Creating a phase 2 plan should not be seen as failure. If anything, that encourages your client, that says, we're here for you, we know your goals, we're ready to get this launched and off the ground for you, and we're the best choice to help to see it grow. Show progress and stay in line with the deliverables. Again, along the way, you're going to refine your roles and your processes. If you're doing it along the way in small increments, you're pivoting, and chances are your client's not really going to notice, or if they notice, there's nothing that they're going to say about it. It's just a part of the process. And then keep your team on track, on task with the right tools.
And tools range, just as a note here, this is my IT side stuff in here. Tools range from different, we use Jira in our space, but there are different, there's Microsoft, their project management tools, there's, Trello, but there's even some that are, simple spreadsheets. A simple spreadsheet can go a long way of being able to actually help manage and budget. I've come up with, different levels of just tools to help give a visual for people on the team and our clients so that they understand where exactly things are. So, don't be afraid to even the simplest type thing. You don't, you need big tools to actually build on and keep things organized with that.
But one point, even though Brian has already gone to the next slide, it's fine. No, too many tools, you guys, can create a lot of clutter. So make sure as you're kicking off your project that you're evaluating. There's no one size fits all for your team or for a project. And so don't be afraid to do your research and make sure that you have the right ones in place. That's all.
Right.
Okay, yeah, we can go now. All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about process. This is our process at Media Current and how we define our process for most projects. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing, you guys, and even within our own organization, it doesn't work for every project. So this is something that you just need to take the time to evaluate and define before you really start to get into that development phase. The one thing that I want to preach here and I really want to highlight, especially as a PM, push hard for that discovery phase, whether it's your client that's pushing back or it's your internal organization. But there is so much value in taking that time and being in the room with your client and being able to see their reactions, see their passion, and again, get all those questions answered up front. And then in the end, it builds that partnership, which is what you want.
This is something I pulled from the Scrum Alliance, this image here, especially as we all kind of work in the agile type, environments, whether it be agile, waterfall, this graphic to me was really good because it really gave a good workflow process of, what we're talking about here. Really just establishing, like I was saying, the product owner level there, kind of going through, ranking the list of what's important, those MVPs there, which leads into, product backlog, sprint planning meetings. Those are something that are very key because it allows you to really take the items and create a realistic workflow. Sometimes going back to the overcommitment, we can build a sprint out that's way too much. And so when you don't complete everything, then it almost seems like, okay, we're not completing sprints. When really, if you have a successful sprint planning meeting, being honest with yourself, that communication and team builds out proper organization there. So you are successfully closing sprints, getting things done that meet the deliverables on there. Yeah, this is just a great graphic. I think this is something that I recommend. It'll be available on the slide deck, but it's always good just kind of have this as a reminder, especially as you're starting new projects. If you're in an existing project, it gives that overall just workflow. So, if you do wind up getting off track or you have things that kind of go off key there, you can find a place in things like this to pull yourself back in and get back on track with that. Continuing clear communication, I think, is really key. Like I said, I was going back to earlier, we have lots of different things, simple documents, simple type of, things to open up that communication. This here is an example of a sprint approval document that I created with one of our clients that really helped kind of go through and establish what we were doing through sprints. Whenever we did the sprint planning, the product owner and I would actually create this document together. We'd lay out what we agreed on, and then we would work and build the sprint off of that. And at the end of the sprint, I basically would send back and say, look, do you agree we completed these? They really valued that because it was not only a building of the sprint together, but it kind of kept on track to know exactly what they were completing. And so as their leadership or whatever are asking them, hey, how's the project going, what's actually doing, wanting to know what they're getting out of it, they were able to actually just easily hand this to them and see what's going on. Not everybody's going to be in a project management software or ticketing type software and have that. So, just simple things like this really creates that level of communication and transparency for that.
So continuing with ways to clearly communicate. Take the time to keep your backlog tidy. Even if you don't have a client that's in Jira and checking statuses, take the time to clean it up. And it can also be a motivator for your team. As you start to see the tasks be complete and the sprints get smaller and smaller, or the backlog gets smaller and smaller, it really opens that door for that final push, right? Don't oversaturate your sprints with too many tasks. You set that timeline, and then you work backwards from there. You have your delivery dates, and if you need to get extra things in there, communicate it with the client if it needs to go down into the next sprint. Quick check-ins are key, but do not turn them into status calls. Before you start to kick off your project, set up the time weekly to have a status call with your client. That way, they know they have that block with you for the beginning, and then you can do your quick check-ins in email. And there's no such thing as over-communication. If you feel like you're over-communicating, for me as a PM, that means that I'm doing it right. So, let's talk about everybody's favorite thing, delivery. it's getting close to the end, but not just delivering with success. And what does that mean, and how do you do it? First things first, check your deliverables and your against your established MVP. I know you're probably tired of hearing me and Brian say that about making deliverable lists, but it really is key to keeping you on track. And if you're doing it throughout the project, again, there's no surprises, which makes pivoting easy. Does the delivery match up with the success outline? Are there elements of failure present? So going back to those failures that you talked about with the client in the very beginning of the project. And then what happens if your timeline got extended? Extending a timeline is not a project killer. Do you guys hear me? Extending a timeline is not a project killer. The key to that, though, is just setting the expectation and communicating it. That's all your client wants from you. They want to feel like you have their back. They want to feel like you're their partner. And then raising the red flags the minute that you see them. If you're not surprising, we have time to deal with it. And one of my favorite things that I preach throughout for my team is I can manage what I know. So empowering your team to come to you as soon as they see those red flags, because you have time to fix it.
So this is one of my favorite slides here. retrospectives are, at the end of a deliver, it is something that is really important to go through. I've heard them called postmortems, and that the word always makes me kind of crawl. I'm like, okay, really, because it kind of gives the indication that there's failure in the project, and that's not always key. A retrospective is something that is really important to help the team grow. So if you're an internal team working together regularly, or it is a client that you're working on multiple projects with, and it's something that is very key to be able to grow upon and build and know what's proper there. I said throw a wake, not a funeral, because really postmortem's kind of like, okay, it's the end of this, and it can make it like, well, what did we screw up on this? And that's not where you want to go. The key through that is to learn to grow on what successes you did, and what wasn't successful. What wasn't successful to me is more important on that, because then as you go into another project, whether it's the same team or not, you're able to actually build upon those ideas and know what worked well and what didn't. We're talking about pivot here, but sometimes, why did you have to pivot? What was going on that it didn't actually change? And so, being able to understand that of what was the normal, what's kind of your regular routine, and what is new that you have to build upon is really key on there. And then, just working through any agendas that, getting feedback from your team that builds that kind of bond, and knowing that the team feels like they're successful in that. Even if, the project didn't go off as well, building that and understanding so that they can communicate, they can talk, really builds that their voice is heard, they're able to walk through things, and they're preparing themselves better for the next thing that they're walking into with that. So with this, we've got probably about 15 minutes left, and wanted to open it up because really this is something where it's not just us as talking heads. We want to really open it up for situations and everything, questions that anybody might have in the room that can work with that. Project management is not necessarily just about it's got to be this way, but it's really working together to collaborate. So wanted to open up and see what questions anyone have, or is there situations to discuss in your kind of projects you're working on now.
Well, we must have did a really good job.
Yeah.
Great.
I have a question.
See the hand.
What are some examples you could bring up about building team morale? Some tips?
I like to send cake. I find it does well. No, one of the things that I always take time to do when I'm trying to build team morale is
Weird thing to do.
Yeah. I find one of the most effective things you can do is the simple check-in. It's not work related. It's not project related. It's not anything. It's, Stefan, how was your kid? How was his baseball game? Our devs are people. And the more you treat them like people, the better off you're going to be as a project manager.
Yeah. I think too also is, going back to those health checks again as well as a team, and then kind of being able to really have that, know the pulse of what's going on. So if someone starts off the project, they're really excited, they're really communicating, and then through it, you barely, hear from them. They're not really updating tickets, or they're, the timeline's going off. They're taking longer. Those are things you can maybe, message them to the side to say, hey, how's it going? What can I do to help you? It doesn't mean that you're taking on their workload or anything, but it really just allows you to have that communication, that you're understanding what's going on. We've had, different things from, okay, they're having family issues, or, things like that. It's just, it really takes it out of just, what we're talking about. It's more like working with, you're building a family together in a project, and you're treating it that way, and just kind of building those. So, really, it's like Victoria saying, they're people too. If we work on those things, doing that, but sometimes even small things like having a meeting that is a quick like, hey, let's just talk and see what's going on. It's not work related, it's not project related, but just see how things are going. Are really good with that.
And those are examples for us. Media Current is mostly a remote team. 90% of it, I think, is the percentage. But so our communications come through talking. If you are you know, in a normal office setting, make time to go out and do stuff as a team. It's huge. So, or like I said, I like to send cake. You know, I did like to bribe people with food. I would just bring cookies and be like, "Hey guys, here you go." So
I have yet to get cake.
you.
I'm feeling kind of sad if you went.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So you typically have discovery as a separate phase up front. When you're doing design with your client in terms of coming up with the components and all that, is that typically a separate sprint that you do prior to development, or is that in conjunction with?
So that's a great question. And just to kind of reiterate this, asking if we do discovery in a separate sprint or if it's part of the overall project.
Design, actually.
Design on that. So it depends on the need of that. If it is a actual discovery, we do that as separate sprints on there. We'll work up, it can be, if it's design specific, we work up the wireframes or things like that as to kind of get a proof of concept of what's going on with that. But sometimes unfortunately they don't have room for discovery, and so we kind of have to do it on the fly. So you build that into your actual sprints. But it is always good to have a discovery phase, which can be a 1 to 2 week type sprint, or we've had discoveries where they're a couple months on there. So it just really ranges on one's ability. But yeah, it's easier to do that because then you kind of stop on there, and you can build that up.
She was asking if we did design sprints before we started development.
Oh, I'm sorry. So just design sprints on that? Yeah, and so in the workflow process, we do. We try and do, it's a little bit like a waterfall type, approach with that. So yeah, you do the designs first, and then you go into development as part of that as well. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Yeah.
It's okay.
All right, anybody else?
How do you find out all the things that they don't know that they need to have?
No, every time we go into this, they're experts. They're